A very good evening to our audience in Guyana, Trinidad, around the world, here in New York. We want to welcome you again to our Monday night program on Globespan 24/7. We want to thank Nohar Singh for making this platform available, and of course, to Devin Bissou, our technical specialist, who's doing all the work in the background. We want to acknowledge as we speak tonight that the President and the Vice President and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, as we all know, they're in Washington, D.C. on government matters, and we wish the President and his delegation all the best. Tonight, we continue our discussion on Guyana and, of course, issues that affect our country, and one that seems to be very, very dominant and heartbreaking is that of domestic violence. Tonight, we have with us two outstanding Guyanese, both are lecturers at the University of Guyana, Dr. Paulette Henry and Dionne. She's also doing her doctorate now, so she will be a doctor very soon. Both of them are lecturers and very qualified in the field for which we are discussing tonight. So ladies, welcome to the program tonight.
Thank you and good night to all of you in audience.
Thank you for your warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight.
Thank you, ladies. And of course, my co-host, Dr. Rose. Dr. Rose, welcome.
Thank you, Charles, and welcome Dr. Paulette Henry and Ms. Dionne Frank. It's a pleasure having you on our program tonight to discuss one of the major topics affecting Guyana, and that is domestic violence. Thank you.
And professors, our topic tonight is the rise of domestic violence and its impact of young girls and women in Guyana elsewhere. And I'm sure our male audience will say, well, what happened to us? We also have, we are the victim of domestic violence. But I guess in our discussion tonight, we can incorporate both. But before we start, professors, I think Guyanese are mixed, or not only Guyanese, but all of us are mixed of what really is domestic violence. Without contradicting each other, maybe Dr. Henry, you want to start us off with what in your professional judgment is domestic violence?
I would consider domestic violence as any form of abuse that affects a person physically, emotionally, mentally, but it's intent to hurt a person. You know, it causes harm in one form or the other. And many a time we think of it only in the physical form, but more and more we are seeing the impact of the other forms and aspects of violence. So emotional harm, you know, mental, economic abuse, all of those constitute an element of violence, and sometimes they overlap. But I'll stop here and allow the conversation to flow.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. And Professor Frank, anything you want to add to what Dr. Henry just said?
I just want to say that when we speak about domestic violence, we're also talking about deprivation, whether it's of liberty, coercion, and as Dr. Henry said, it's not just physical. We would generally say that it's any act, whether it is verbal, whether it's physical, but the intention is to cause harm or result in harm to the person.
Excellent. I think those are really excellent definition of domestic violence. And what I'm glad about, professors, is that Guyana and the world have acknowledged that domestic violence is a problem. And because we acknowledge it's a problem, then we need to work on solutions to those problems. And tonight we hope, as we discuss, go through the details of it, that you professors who have been in the field for so long will tell us what might be some of the solutions, if there is any, and I'm sure there might be, to help us to dissipate this problem and hopefully eradicate it from our society. But before we go into the solution, Dr. Henry, is there any empirical evidence of domestic violence being on a cultural issue? Is it based on our upbringing? What caused this problem in the first place?
Thank you for that question, and I think it leads right back to the whole discourse on socialization and the whole concept of power. Those are two dynamics that we have to address every time we talk about the issue of domestic violence, because it's one person exerting their in trying to insert their will and authority and to take control of another person, as Dionne said, liberty and their rights and their freedoms. Good, and very often it happens in the home, and a child sees that happen. The child sees how one parent, and largely it's women, it's disproportionately against women. We see all the statistics in our country. If you go on our help and shelter site, you'll see how many phone calls, hotline calls, you'll see numbers that they get on a daily basis, monthly basis, and the like. And we also know that it's a cause that affects children. So definitely it's an issue of power, control, and those who are in the home see and experience it, and then it continues. That cycle of violence continues. It doesn't cease like that, right? But the thing is, when you started this conversation, Mr. Sugrim, you raised a very pertinent point in terms of talking to women and girls, and men and boys sometimes are not a part of the conversation. And I really want to use this opportunity to say that in addressing the whole notion of violence against women and girls, we have to understand the social dynamic and how our men and boys are involved in that, how they are sometimes not exposed to the level of discipline that girls are exposed to in the home, how we train them and how we socialize them that may contribute to violence within the home and within our communities, and how girls are trained up to be subjective and to be passive. And that whilst that is changing, it's still socially acceptable in some quarters, and we have a lot of work, all of us, to do to break that whole cycle and to break the understanding of male socialization and female socialization. The last thing I want to say before I stop for now is that we no longer should, be a part of that conversation which says, tie my heifer and loose my bull, which is a colloquial expression for Caribbean people, where we keep our girls in. We don't tell them everything, but we expose our boys, not recognizing what the social harms that we are doing to boys and girls when we don't socialize them and help them to understand and to respect and to value each other. Thanks.
Excellent point.
Repeat that local. Here.
Tie my heifer, loose my bull.
What's a heifer?
A heifer is a cow, a female cow.
Okay.
And you know how valuable a cow is in our region. So we very often tie and protect that. It's not that the bull is not important.
Heifer is a female cow.
It's a female.
So you keep the female women and girls indoor, or you let go the men.
And you let them, and you expose them to violence and abuse too.
Okay, got you.
Excellent, Dr. Henry. And Dr. Rose needs to spend some more time in Guyana because he's not acquainted with our colloquial in Guyana. But Professor Henry, follow up from what Dionne, Professor Frank, continue what Dr. Henry just said. Is there any, I know we come from a society where whatever religion we belong to, it's like a male-dominated society. Not only Guyana, but it's a problem around the world. And most of our major religions also have the male superiority. And that has transcended not Guyana, but around the world. Do you think there is any element of cultural problem that might raise its head in the area of domestic violence?
Yes, there is. Undoubtedly, Guyana, like several other countries, strongly patriarchal. And so with that, the gender norms, we expect that males to be very dominant in what they do. They must exert control in whatever way possible. And the whole issue about how they understand leadership in the home or of the family, how they understand control, and how they understand submission from females, that in itself leads to what I would want to say the misguided notion that if it means that to exercise that control means for you to become physical, then that is what they do. And that is how they have been socialized. And this is something happening across different family type and different ethnicity, different religious background as well. I've had the opportunity recently to speak in my church that I attend to speak about domestic violence, just a sensitization session, sharing, what are some of the common forms of abuse that women may experience. And surprisingly, lots of persons contacted me after to say that they are victims of domestic violence. They have been abused in one way or the other. And in many of the cases, it was not physical abuse, it was emotional abuse. And the whole notion about what submission means for a Christian man, that also is another factor, because for some, submission means control at whatever cost. And they use the Bible to justify that, not really taking all the different verses into consideration in terms of how you treat people. They just hold on to submission, and submission says the wife should submit, and so because they should, I am entitled to treat them anyway. But that is not only for Christians. You're seeing it in other across other religions as well. It's a part of our culture. That's how we have been socialized. And there's one school of thought that would say to us that because of our history of slavery, being abused is a part of our psyche. And so we have come to accept that, if the behavior needs to be modified, and lashes, whether it's with a whip, a wood, anything, then that's the way we go to do it. And so there is one section who would know that it's going on and turn a blind eye to it because it's a part of our culture. And then there's the other section who uses it, physical violence as a form of control. And some people just do not know how to express themselves. And because of the lack of skills to be able to express themselves, they resort to violence. And that's the reality.
So well said, Professor Frank. And before Dr. Rose come on, and I like what you just brought up there too. And I said it today in a chat that I'm in, that we pick a part of something that support us without looking at the entire context in which it is spoken. So when the Bible says that, women submit to your husband, it also says husband loves your wife as Christ loved the church. Exactly. But we forget that part. We just put, you got to submit to the husband. And I think we are just taking things out of context in many times to support what we want to hear. And I know, and I don't want to be accused of picking out. I know in Islam, I believe that the male child gets one part, but the female child get half of that as part of the sharing of the wealth of the family. And it's like, I guess, so even in the religion that we belong to, I think it has brought that upon us. And I remember going to school, and your teacher will take the wild cane in those days and would strike you on your back and put you over the bench and strike you on your bottom to put you in line. I mean, and those things bring fear, and they do have psychological problem, and those also create problem as we grow up later on in life. Professor Henry, what do you think?
I do support that because it's how we were nurtured. Dionne brought in a very important aspect of our colonial past as slaves, as indentured servants, and the like. Our orientation to spare the rod and spoil the child. Our pulling to those things that are of convenience and not recognizing how those cultural patterns are passed on from generation to generation, from one family to the other family, and communities see abuse and they don't know that it's abuse and they don't always speak to it. I must say that in Guyana, things are changing now. We have legislation to address several of the issues, but we still do have corporal punishment in schools where the head teacher is the one who should be the person to supervise the punishment. That is still there. We still have in our homes. I know things are changing, and more parents are trying their very best to be the best parent that they can be. But we have an increase in reporting of abuse, of violence, and the like. But some people still prefer or still don't know how to report violence and abuse when they see it, because sometimes they think it's family stories, right? But this is not to be accepted. It shouldn't be condoned in any form, be it physical or otherwise.
Thank you. Dr. Rose? Yep.
Good evening, Dr. Henry, and good evening, Ms. Frank. Our folks will want to know where we found you all from. But before I say anything else, I want our folks to know, all our listeners to know, that you can tune into YouTube and go to Globespan 24/7 to be connected to this program tonight. Okay? Now, Dr. Henry, I don't know how many people knew you in Guyana, but I met many of your students who told me that they knew you and so forth, who responded. Can you give us a little background of yourself?
I am Paulette Henry, country girl from Berbice, the ancient town of Berbice, New Amsterdam. I started off as a trained teacher and then moved into social work, became a probation officer, worked up till becoming a senior probation officer, and then UG grabbed me and asked me to serve. I stayed there for a number of years, moved a little bit, served as a child protection officer with the United Nations Children Fund, and with the USAID as a behavior and communication advocate specialist. Then came right back home to UG, where I am now serving in several capacities, but I currently hold the position as the Dean of the Faculty of Social Science. I am a mother, wife and mother of 3 adult children with grandchildren now, and enjoying different aspects of life.
Good. What about you, Ms. Frank?
Okay. So I have spent almost all my years since qualifying as a social worker, working as a social work educator at the University of Guyana. So I've been there for it's been about 15 years now, thereabout. But apart from working as a social work educator, I've had the opportunity to work to reduce unplanned pregnancy among adolescent mothers. I bring that up to share that experience because that was one which really opened my eyes in terms of the impact of domestic violence on women and girls in this country. Um, some of the stories, if I should recall, you would ask me whether they are true or not. But they are indeed, and they paint a picture of what the experiences of women and girls are. So professionally, that's me, apart from serving on executive committees for a number of professional associations. But I'm a mother of, I would say, 3 successful young adults. I believe if you were to ask me, what brings me the most joy, I would say apart from what I do at UG, it would be nurturing those 3 successful young adults. And in a synopsis, that's who I am.
Good, very good. Now, let me get to some questions that I think will be beneficial to our group here. Now, experts have concluded, I'm looking at the global picture for us before I come down to Guyana, that domestic violence is actually known as domestic abuse or IPV, intimate partner violence. Have you heard about that term?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. As a matter of fact, intimate partner violence is one of the most common forms of violence against women and girls.
Okay. Now, and it said domestic violence or IPV or domestic abuse is being used. There are a number of characteristics. One is to maintain power or control over an intimate partner. Two is to maintain dominance over that person. Now, my question to you is this. If that's the case, that's domestic violence, then what are the solutions? I can give you more definition, but I don't want to go into all of them right now. But if that's the case, then what can be done to reduce this type or this level of violence against women, in some case against men, but I'll come to the men part later. It's a power-driven concept, a power-driven thing.
All right. So there are a number of actions that can be taken to reduce violence against women and girls. But I want to say, before I go further, so you're using the term domestic violence, domestic abuse interchangeably, but generally the scholarship tells us that when we use domestic abuse, it is more expansive and cover all the different aspects of abuse that one may encounter. And so some scholars may favor domestic abuse over domestic violence.
And let me just interject. That means physical assault, bullying, emotional and psychological abuse, yelling, put down one's being, put down one's person, being ignored, having making all the decisions by one person, and so forth. Social isolation and a dominating behavior. I didn't want, but as you mentioned that, yeah, that's actually the expansive version of it. Go ahead now.
Yes, but still that does not cover every aspect of it. But
Okay.
before saying solution, I think it is fitting to at least to acknowledge what is being done. And so there are a number of community-based organizations, national NGOs that have been working in this area. They have been providing support for women, court support. They have been providing what is commonly referred to as empowerment training, meaning that you take women who are so affected or who are vulnerable at risk, you take them through an educational period, sensitizing them about the impact. Sometimes we take it that every woman who is being abused knows that that is not the case. And so sometimes there is the need for education at that level. And so there are community organizations that are doing that. Nationally, we know there is the Domestic Violence Act of 1996. It has been amended. There's the Sexual Offences Act. And within the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security, there is the Domestic Violence Policy Unit, as well as the 914 operation, which is a mechanism in place that allows anyone who is being abused to call to access support through that. And not only the person who is being abused can call, But anyone who is witness to or aware of someone who is being abused can take the opportunity to call. Of course, there are other programs across the ministry, but I believe in terms of solution, where I want to start is the need for an integrated approach. And when I say an integrative approach, I'm speaking to government services integrated with community-based services provided community-based organizations, national NGO. So yes, there is talking, there is some amount of collaboration, but I believe, notwithstanding that some of our agencies, they work in silos. The Guyana police forces involved, and police, in every police station, there ought to be what you refer to as a domestic violence room, where matters brought to the attention of the police should be addressed out of the public and not just over the counter in a police station. But if you were to talk to victims, if you were to talk to advocates, they would say to you that they tend to be very much frustrated because of the lack of integration within all the services. And at the macro level, that is something that we need to really address to ensure that our response is holistic. So that's macro. But then I think we also need to address gender norms, our socialization. And Dr. Henry spoke to the fact that we carry this notion that we should tie the F or lose the bull. And so we keep the girls closeted. They're not exposed, but we allow men to do what they like. And I think it is Professor Yudin Barata, who conceptualized the notion of the ideological and the material relations of gender. And if we were to look at this in terms of the ideological relation, we tend to see girls as the gender that we should keep closeted. And so we nurture them in a certain way, believing that we should not expose them to certain things, but we allow for more exposure of the men. And so they have a more expansive knowledge of society, what goes on in society, and how to go on and how to behave in some cases. But in contrast, when we were to look at how the material relation operate, is that we bestow wealth on the male child, and we believe that we should not do the same for our girls because a man is going to take care of us. But in essence, what we are doing, we are leaving our girls vulnerable. So when they get into a relationship or a marriage, they tend to, many, while this is changing, it's still happening a lot, they become so reliant on a male partner. And so when, for example, the man withholds money from them, or control even the money that they are working for, it's as if it's a norm. This is something that I should accept. But that is not something that we should accept. And so we have to work on our social norms, the way in which we socialize, the things that we tell our girls. And we tell there are parents who condone boys, men, eating out. So you got to stand up for your rights. But the girls and women have rights too. And one right would be not to be abused, not to take any kind of emotional abuse, not to be used as a football. Dr. Henry may pick up from here and go on to some of what we have seen, what we are seeing, and what can be done.
And I do agree. I don't know if Dr. Rose, you wanted to jump in before I join?
No, go ahead.
Uh-huh. I think, Dionne, you really set an excellent tone in terms of looking at what it is that we can do when we start to talk about the solutions. But it's not a quick fix. I think what you pointed to in terms of that holistic approach that is required is something that I've been championing for quite a while, and I think many others in the field are looking to see, because we recognize the cultural impact that Mrs. Sugrim started off this conversation with, and that whole notion of socialization. So it calls for that re-socialization, that retraining, and that training that has to happen in homes where the parents are not the same as we used to know parenting uh, in previous times, where you normally would see a mother and a father, or an extended family with a grandparent, and there is that whole family support. Families are no longer like that. There are different kinds of families, and we have a lot of families that are facing financial and other stressors, and those stressors, whilst it doesn't excuse them, makes them vulnerable and makes the children and families vulnerable to abuse. So we have to look at a holistic approach that takes into consideration that family situation and what the family support could possibly look like. We also have to have a whole plan, a whole behavior change, a strategy. I recall, and I've said this before when we talk about suicide, because much of my work is linked to studying suicide and what contributes to or not contributes to it. And I recalled in a conversation, in a presentation that I would have done, sharing the idea that the approach that Guyana took to managing HIV is the same approach I think we should look to when we are looking to things like suicide and violence. We need a whole approach that looks at the bottom up, the macro level, as Dionne spoke to, and the bottom up and the top down approach. So you look at macro, you look at micro, but you look at families and communities, you look at what our teachers are teaching in school, you look at what our books are saying that our children are reading from, how we infuse this into teacher education, into nurses education. So it's not when you come to a university or when we have an issue that we address the problem. We also look at our budget to see what monies we are apportioning to our ministries of education, human services, healthcare, NIS, and the like. We have to measure all of the things that add up and contribute to violence in all of its forms. The thing is that I also do not think that we spend enough time studying the financial, the economic impact of domestic violence, because every time a woman or a child is hurt, and that child or woman or that person has to take time off from work, we lose. Every time that child or person has to go to seek medical attention, we lose. Where are those costs? How do we count to all those costs that the society has to pay for? And then if it results in the kind of violence that a person has to be incarcerated, we also have to pay to maintain that person. We don't measure the whole cost, and that is why we need a holistic approach that is geared towards prevention, a prevention strategy that retrain our boys and girls to understand from the onset what violence looks like. And so they know and they understand how to speak to each other, to help our women and men to understand how to have productive and conducive conversations, because our women needs to be heard and our men also need to be heard, and they need a space where they can talk. We've heard that the church is not always speaking the right language, or the religious organization, I should say, may not always address it, because we sometimes prefer to say, go home. I used to be a probation officer, and I've heard that story over and over again in a court where you had to stand to represent issues, and hearing magistrates saying, man, this is husband and wife, y'all try and see how you can make up. Albeit now, I think the court is more serious, and I think more people are still reporting reporting. But sometimes we are a little bit intolerant because we think that a person can easily walk away from the violence and abuse, and we blame that person when they choose to stay, but sometimes they don't have any option. Sometimes they don't know how to walk away. Sometimes they have no resources to walk away to, and walk away where and who takes them in, especially when you have children and you are hurting. So whilst we want to address this, and I think every country, this is a global pandemic, and every country is trying, just as Guyana is. I think, as I'm going right back to where Dionne started by saying that we need every ministry, every agency, every sector involved in it. No one party, no silo can address the magnitude of the problem, right? You see people, the murder suicide issue, where did that come from? And so when you raise the notion of the intimate partner violence, which addresses some aspects of the whole notion of violence and abuse that is meted out to women and children and to men as well, we have to look at a whole approach, a very comprehensive approach that addresses every aspect of what we are facing within our society.
Let me go to some.
Oh,
Let me go to some data. We're going to get back to that. Worldwide, they say 1 in every 3 women is being affected by domestic violence. In Guyana, it's 1 in 2. And the minister, Dr. Vindi Prasad, said that 55% of the women in Guyana are experiencing domestic violence. Now, we know you need a societal approach to solve the problem. But I'll be asking both of you, what you think the government should do to lead in this area. You spoke about the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. There should be something like that. But what do you think the government should do to lead to reduce domestic violence in this country?
I think we started to answer that question, Dionne. I don't know if you want to jump in, because that whole approach that involves and takes every agency. So police should be working together with human service, should be working with health, should be working with education, should be working with the media. Dionne, you just take it away.
Well, the thing about it is that domestic violence is not only a problem for the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security. The rate at which our women are abused and the impact on the healthcare system tells us that domestic violence is also a public health issue. And so, as we said, there needs to be an integrated approach, but in the same way that the Ministry of Human Services as a department dedicated to that, and there's one dedicated department, but there are also several other departments that may they provide counseling, other support services they may access through the difficult circumstances unit. There needs to be a similar department in the Ministry of Health to address domestic violence. There also needs to be one in the Ministry of Home Affairs. We know there's the National Task Force where they are representatives of these different ministries and other bodies where they come together, but that's at the macro level, policy level. But in terms of service delivery should not only be limited to the Guyana Police Force in terms of responding to reports. It should not only be limited to the Human Service Ministry in terms of the provision of counseling. If we were to take into consideration the kinds of support that our women and girls who are abused or victims who are vulnerable need, it is beyond what is provided. For example, there's a tendency to say to women to leave when they are in a situation where they're abused. And we say, if it is that their life is in danger, if there's a threat, you remove them from that danger or potential danger. But where do we put them? There are only a limited number of shelters that can accommodate women who take the bold step to step away from that abusive union relationship in the best interest of themselves and their children. And I believe in every region there needs to be a shelter, and not just a shelter, a well-equipped center and supporting services. Because when we ask a woman to remove from such situation, her needs still need to be fulfilled. The needs of the children still need to be fulfilled. And I think one of the problems in our society is the lack of confidentiality. And I say this because, for example, our shelters should be, they should not, their locations should not be publicly known. But yet, from time to time, you hear of persons reporting where they're located. And we had one example when the national budget was being read to say where we're going to be expanding to, where located, and where we're going to be expanding to. So we need to tighten up in such areas as well as expand on the limited services that we already have.
But just to add to what Dionne say, Professor Rose, she raised the issue of budget, and that's really a critical aspect of it. While some monies are allotted to all of the things that Dionne spoke to, I think we need to keep our eyes on how much resources is allocated to financing the reduction and or the prevention of domestic and gender-based violence, or violence in all of its forms, because very often the social services tend to get the very smallest portion of the budget. And if we recognize that this is a serious issue, and we recognize that we need an integrated approach, or a whole approach that addresses this notion of violence in all of its forms, then we have to fund it and resource it properly. We have to have social workers in schools. We have to have social workers in communities. We should have social workers in several of the agencies and hospitals, in all of the places where services are to be provided. We have to have people with the kinds of skills that can properly respond. I remember years ago as a teacher, we went into communities and did preventative work. As a probation officer, as a young probation officer, we formed the clubs. Now things are different, and the amount of work that is coming to the agency, because if you remember, Mr. Sugrim, the days of the panchayat, you had a panchayat in the quarantine and community areas that helped to resolve some of the problems. Now,
can you explain what panchayat is?
A panchayat is that's again, it's the local, and this is coming from India, colloquial or a village leader, village elder that will help resolve issues that you are faced with. And so I think the UN invested a few years back in retraining some people in the panchayat style to help them at the community grassroots level to resolve in issues that they were facing in families and communities. Now we don't have those kind of resources. Our religious organizations, again, they too need training, because they are very often the first line of response. When people have issues, you want to talk to your pastor, you want to talk to your leader in the temple, you want to talk to all of those persons, but sometimes they don't have the skills. More and more people are going and relying on their social workers, but we don't always have them. We have a lot of grassroots people who are not always as skilled as they should be. So they too need to be upskilled. So we have to invest in our people to help our people, because we have to remember that hurt people will continue to hurt people. And unless they get the kind of help that they need, then our problem will continue. If we want to reduce the problem, we have to invest, not only by putting all the plans and the fancy things in place, but financing them and then monitoring to see whether we are making an impact.
Before we go on the break and before my friend jump in, Charles, I want to give you some figures here and tell me more about it. In Guyana, domestic violence has increased from 2008 by 78% to 2011 in 3 years span. And from since 2011 to 2019, it has increased by 89%. What do you think is the reason for the increases? Briefly, before we go on a break.
There are so many factors that could be contributing. There is no one factor. Violence is an interrelated phenomenon. Physical, emotional, whatever form of violence is, they're all interconnected. And while, as Dionne said, it doesn't affect one family type. That's something that we have to remember, because very often we look to poor communities and poor families. It's because sometimes their voices are louder, but wealthier families cry in silence and suffer in silence because they don't want the shame, or they go to private doctor, they don't go to the public hospitals. It's there. So, and we have a culture of acceptance, and we have to look towards changing that culture of acceptance. And I think we've spoken to that. So the escalation is linked to that culture that accepts. We need to have a culture where no means no, and all of us, regardless of where we are, regardless of which religious or social status we hold, all of us are speaking the one language, a language that says no and means no to all form of violence. A culture and a society that invests in the reduction of violence if we want it to be reduced. If we don't, then we'll be having this conversation for quite a long time.
All right, ladies, we will continue the discussion on solutions as you have started, but we take a short commercial break. And audience, don't go anywhere. We have a lot of solutions that our panel will recommend to us today. So stay tuned.
Travelspan has some very cheap fares for July and August to and from Guyana. Seats are limited, but call Travelspan today for these discounted low fares in July and August. In New York, call 718-845-0437. That's 718-845-0437. In Georgetown, call 227-1701. That's 227-1701. And in Berbice, call 337-4287. That's 337-4287. For discounted airfares to and from Guyana, call Travelspan today.
Are you missing homemade food, snacks, drinks, roti and curries, or have a busy schedule? Then get your favorite curries and roti delivered directly to your home with all from one supplier. Come order your duck, goat, or chicken, fully cooked and ready to eat with dal puri or bus up shut. We also now have chicken tikka masala or lamb vindaloo available with regular naan or garlic naan. Don't forget to add your solo, icy, coconut water, or Nestle drinks to these delicious meals. Select your choice, and load your box and let allfromonesupplier.com deliver directly to your home. All From One Supplier has you covered for all your food. Plus, if you need pepper sauce, curry powders, fish, meat, ghee, and so much more. We also have tasty pastries like pine tarts, cheese rolls, currants rolls, coconut rolls and so much more. Sales are ongoing every week, and your first order is 10% off once you apply the coupon code, Globespan24x7. Log on to allfromonesupplier.com today and purchase. Allfromonesupplier.com is your one-stop shop for all West Indian items, and remember, it's free shipping to all U.S. states.
Looking for a reliable contractor? Look no further. Call Sings Construction today. At Sings Construction, they can cover all your jobs, interior and exterior. We cover painting, bathrooms, kitchen, doors, windows, tiles, brick, decks, flooring, and concrete. Call Naresh Singh today for your free quote at 91723848180. That's 91723848180.
Welcome back to our program on Globespan 24/7 as we discuss the rise of domestic violence and its impact on young girls and women in Guyana and elsewhere. And to help us through as we started, the beginning is Dr. Paulette Henry and Professor Frank. Professors, I don't know if you saw today's paper. There was a beautiful letter written by Atika Stevens. And she spoke of the law and the victim of domestic abuse. Her letter started with nothing justifies abuse. But then she went on to the solution to that is more of the law, the legal part of it, the police and so on. And I want to differ a little from that. And I want to give a little perspective before I ask the question. You know, before I left Guyana, I had the privilege to work with Demar Distillers Limited. And at one of our meetings, Komal Samu, who is now the chairman, he made a very profound statement. And he said, if you have a concrete wall and it cracks, you can do two things. You can take sand and cement and cover it up and it will look beautiful. But in a couple of years, it will crack again. Or you can dig the foundation, correct it, and once you correct that foundation, the problem is solved. I believe that many of our solutions, our proposed solution, and Dr. Henry, you really alluded to what I was going to say now, many of our solutions are more reactive than proactive. But you made a great point about our school system. You know, there is a great saying that out of the mouth of babes, you know, we all, great things happen. What I think is missing, when we went to school, we learned the alphabet from, now it's grade 1, I guess. It was in those days was Prep A and Prep B. And then we learned to count and we do all these different things. What I've never heard in school, Professor Henry and Dr. Frank, hopefully will be on back, is what is the role of a female? What is the role of a male in our society? We were never taught that. It was basically what we see in the home. And I am suggesting to you ladies is that if part of our school curriculum would be what to teach our little babes in school, what are their roles as they begin to grow up and become men and women in our society? You see, what we have done in the past, we have locked the gate when the horse already went out. Or as we said, we are putting the cart before the horse, put it another way. So if we can inculcate in our little babies in school from grade 1 or grade 2, I don't know what grade might be applicable, think of it this way. When a child goes home and see daddy is abusing his or her mother, if that child said to her daddy, he said, Daddy, you're not supposed to do that to your wife. You're not supposed to do that to mommy. I think as a man, that will put a dagger through his heart, because my child is teaching me what I should become. And for the child to teach his or her father, someone has to teach that child. And I'm saying maybe part of our solution, now we can't solve all the problem overnight, but if we can put in our curriculum in school the role of a female, the role of a male in our society, and our kids grow up knowing that, my suggestion, I guess I may be wrong, it can go a far way in reducing what we call domestic violence. Is there any agreement or disagreement to that?
No, you're correct. You are speaking to the whole notion of retraining and retraining from the family, from within, so that we retrain and re-socialize our boys and girls, and we retrain in the school system our boys and girls, so that we don't have boys who only sweep the yard and fetch down the garbage, you know, and girls just to do the household chores of cleaning and cooking and so on. what you're talking about, and which is something that they have started to do, I must commend the Ministry of Education for the Health and Family Life Education program that they have in school, because that Health and Family Life program takes all of those concepts that you just addressed, Mr. Sugrim, and they have packaged it. Just 2 weeks ago, I participated in a training held by the Ministry of Education to talk to they not only spoke to the teachers, they also had parents participate in that program. And those are the things that the conversation was all around: understanding gender norms, understanding how we need to shift those norms in terms of helping our boys to connect with their emotions, and helping our girls and our parents to understand that boys have emotions too, and boys can cry, and boys can express their feelings, and they should be allowed to express their feelings, because if they don't, they get angry and they want to hit out at something or somebody, and so they hurt others. Let me say to Dr. Sugrim that this is
No, I'm
not.
not. I'm not a doctor, Dr. Henry. I'm.
Let me say here and now that this is not to an opportunity to bash men. Men and women, boys and girls, we all need that retraining, because very often boys are left with their mothers. Their mothers are very often the person who is responsible for most of their training in traditional sense, and even now, where there are two-parent households or in single-parent households, the boys are left with mothers who take a large role in their socialization. Good. But what do we want our boys to become? What kind of man, what kind of citizen do we want our boys to become? What kind of woman, what kind of citizen do we want our girls to become, regardless of where they are located? We want them to be able to relate respectfully and responsibly to each other and to the wider society. We don't want angry people in our country. We want love and happiness. We want, if we are to come here in Guyana to do a happiness index, that you'll see our people are largely happy. But the mere fact that our rates of violence and abuse is increasing, it tells us that we are way off that happiness curve that we would like to see. So definitely what we want is not to bash on men, but to acknowledge the fact that men are abusing women a lot. And we want to be able to work together to reduce that. We don't want a society of abuse. We don't want a society of violence. Men want to come home and lay their heads down in peace, just like women. They want to hug a partner and to tell their partner what their story is. A woman wants that too. Men want a home that is comfortable, a family, a space, a community that is comfortable and that they're not harassed, in that community. Women want that too. But how do we get that? It doesn't happen overnight. It happens by talking. We don't want our men locked in with their emotions and not be able to communicate that. If you are not able to talk through what you are thinking and what is hurting, because it makes you less of a man, then you're hurting yourself and you're going to hurt others. I don't have the statistics, but I know for a fact that the New Amsterdam Psychiatric Hospital has more men than women. And why? Because men don't talk. They don't talk through what they should be talking through. They don't talk about their hurt. They don't talk about their pain. Women have been socialized to talk. If something happens and it's hurting me, I have Dionne that I can call. Who do you call to tell? Do you talk? Will it make you less of a man or more of a man? We have definitions of manhood that says men should not cry. If you cry, you're a sissy. You're not a real man. If you talk or walk in a sense and you are judged because of these perceptions. So men have to live up to these stereotypes, and it's tough on them. That's a reality. But it does not mean that they should hit and hurt women. It does not mean either that women should hit and hurt men, because they do. The proportion might be smaller, but it happens. Huh? That's
And
our
Dr. Henry,
reality.
what grade are they teaching that from school? The program that basic education is.
I think it's not at the nursery level, but it's at it starts from the primary level.
At grade 1?
If I give you that statistic, I'll be inaccurate.
Okay, but it's not at primary level. But Professor Frank, before you answer the question too, isn't it the problem also that we have split personalities? You know, at home we treat our family like dirt, but in the public we are this lovely, beautiful person that we can't hurt a fly. Isn't that some of the big problem that we have, that people outside of the home think, oh my God, this guy is such a beautiful guy, and I'm guilty of that too. And at home, we are not as loving as we are on the outside world. Why is that so?
You're guilty of that?
There are many reasons for that. Paulette alluded to something just now, indicating that anecdotal evidence would indicate that there are more men who are institutionalized at the psychiatric hospital than women. And that is because of the fact that they carry different things. They don't seek counseling. Counseling is considered taboo. They don't talk. But apart from that, Guyana has a problem with mental health. And there are many people who go undiagnosed or misdiagnosed, who are suffering from one form of mental illness or another. And simply speaking, we're talking to the fact that people are unable to manage their social life, their family life, work life. And the stressors they face may contribute to some of the mental health issues, apart from some persons may be biologically predisposed to mental illnesses. And bipolar personality may be one of that, and there are so many other forms. But in terms of how we were socialized, some people are of the perception that you don't wash your dirty laundry in public. And so you maintain a certain facade at home, and when you go, so you behave a certain way at home, but when you go out, you portray a different image, because the magistrate has to be respected by the public. But the very magistrate who wants or would like the public to respect him or her is abusive at home. But you don't want outside to know that. And then you threaten the family, and you say to the family, if only you say anything, you tell the children if they say anything at school, you threaten the wife. If only, then I shall do this, I shall not do that. And so you have the family who is suffering in silence, while the community may be of the view that this is a very nice and loving and kind family, and we don't even hear one song coming from the family household. But that is no indication that abuse is not occurring within that household. Now, I use the magistrate as an example, but they are different family led by professional men and women, where abuse is common. And there are different reasons for that. But we cannot escape the fact that because of our socialization, we continue to use violence as a means of instilling discipline, as a means of managing our intimate relationships. And in many cases, we believe that a parent knows how to be a parent or to do parenting, but they lack parenting skill. And it is for that reason why we say all the social institutions have a role to play, because we take it for granted that a mother knows how to discipline a child appropriately, how to instill values, etc. But that is not always the case. And so the religious organizations have a role to play, schools have a role to play, community-based organizations have a role to play. And coming back to the HFLE curriculum, this is one of the things that I appreciate about it, in that they are modules allowing our pupils, our students, to develop life skills, being able to develop negotiation skills. So rather than fighting for a pencil, they know how to talk, how to have that discussion, that they borrow it, or if it is that it's stolen, rather than fighting to get it back, you talk about it and express why it should be returned to you because you're the owner. And there's also problem solving skills, awareness skills. All of that our students are taught through the HFLE curriculum. But I also want to go on to just to solidify something that Paulette said earlier. Men talking more. We need men talking to men more. We need them talking in general. And we need men talking to boys. You know, one of our social work courses that we offer the University of Guyana, this is, I think, the professional development course, where there is a practicum component requiring our students to work in communities with different groups. And some groups, what they do is what we call a boys to men transition, in that they work with young boys in terms of helping them to understand their role, and you know how it is that they transition from one stage to the other, because the psychosocial aspect of their development is very critical, and sometimes that is not always nurtured within the home. And so in the same way that our budding social workers focus on that, other groups need to do that, because families need assistance in terms of maintaining that balance, maintaining that what we would say acceptable level of functionality.
Beautifully put.
Cases,
Yeah, go on, Professor, go on.
Cases where families are hurting, they need support, because when a family is hurting and there is no kind of therapeutic intervention, no kind of social support, it means that the effects that family is facing is going to multiply. And so what we see in one family may just be a microcosm of what is happening in community and in the nation.
Beautifully put, Professor Frank. Dr. Henry, you're on mute. Before you want to continue, and what Professor Frank rightly said is that, as we know, we get married or we elope. No one teaches us what is my role as a husband now. No one tells my wife what is her role as a wife. So we trial and error, and of course, it's there's problem there. So we get a child. We don't know what to do with a child. We have a child, so we got to raise it. We have no parenting skills, as Professor Frank said. Now, in this curriculum, again, that you talk about the ministry is having, if the child can report to the teacher without having legal problem at home, but based on the community arrangement you talk about, the community support. So if the child reports to the teacher, you know what, at home, mommy is, doing this to dad, or dad is doing that to mommy, they can take that to the community level and hopefully help to solve the problem without bringing the police, without bringing, the legal people. You don't want to lock nobody up. You want to help the family to live together. Is that something you think is going to happen soon? Is it we're only speaking in the air? What do you think can happen?
So I want to just say to you that the HFLE program is taught in secondary school, not primary, from grades 7 to 9. I just found that out. So I wanted to share that it starts basically to the earlier sections of the high school, right? But going back to the question that you asked in terms of the community, we used to have a community rule. And I think in some communities there still exists, even though it's not as strong as it used to be, because the communities are not the same as they were in the days gone by. More and more younger people are going into their own families. We don't have the extended families. And as I mentioned, we also used to have that panchayat, or that community-based approach to family and other problem-solving issues. If the court was not often burdened with many of the things that it's now burdened with. If you thief your neighbor fowl cock, the community came together and resolved that issue. I think in the Amerindian communities, they still have some of that, and they must be applauded for that. Through their Tushao system, they have that kind of problem, community-based problem solving, right? But I think the court system came into play because you wanted to deter a problem that was escalating. If the court could be helped via communities, that for me would be perfect, because it takes a community or it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a community or a village to resolve an issue if we can as a community. But think about how our communities are changing with migration, with new people coming in. In my neighborhood, since I got married, I've lived here for 40 years, and my street has changed drastically so. Right? There are houses where lots of people have migrated from within the street. New people have come into the street. It takes time to build up those communal relationships again and to problem solve. And people don't tend to have the patience. You know, you always had a grandparent or somebody who gave wisdom, who was the voice in that community, the community elder that we spoke. And if we can go back to those kinds of things. And that is why it is my belief that if we have social workers in communities, they can help to pull those communities together, find the leaders in those communities, and to help the community to mobilize and organize itself around the community issues. And we will find that gender-based violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence is just one of the other issues that some of the communities face. And when they come together to resolve those issues, they talk around all these other things that are affecting them and that could be resolved. But you have to be committed to be invested in the communities and investing in resolving these problems across our country.
Yeah, I agree. It has to be a holistic approach with everyone, every hand on deck. And I hope that the Minister of Education, the Minister of Social Services, maybe listen to the program, or the staff listen to the program, so that at least they can get some of the input from you wonderful ladies. And hopefully, and I hope that they can implement that program in the primary school to start at the earlier age, because by the time you get to secondary school, you know, train the tree to grow up so it will not deviate from its way. So by the time you get to high school, you're already trained one way. And again, it's nothing, I think, more softer to a parent than a tender 3- and 4-year-old tell them, mommy and daddy, you can't do that. This is not what we were taught in school. And that will go a far way, I believe, to help us resolve this domestic problem. Dr. Rose?
Yes, let me just let the men know that we are indeed fair and balanced. So I'll come to the men aspect of it now. In Guyana, domestic violence against men, 1 in 4 men is being affected, which corresponds to the global data on domestic violence. But they say most men do not complain or do not report it because they don't want to be seen, as you, Dr. Reese, said, as a whim. They want to be seen as macho in their society and among their peers. Now, my question to you, both of you. How do you change the male psyche to understand that they should not tolerate domestic violence? They should not behave as though they are macho in society and accept the role as equal partners with their intimate partner. How would you change the psyche?
All right. You know, I strongly believe that the time has come for us to have this national conversation where we allow men to speak, and not only allow men to speak, but allow to be able to sensitize men. There is nothing wrong with expression of feelings coming from a man. There is nothing wrong when our boys, when our men cry. It, crying does not make a man weaker. What it says is that he is a human being with emotion like every other person. So, in essence, I think this retraining, re-socialization needs to happen. So, starting with a national conversation is one way. Getting men to express themselves and getting men who understand themselves to speak to men, to encourage men, to motivate men. And again, here I must say, I'm glad that this segment is focused on men because we are not about bashing men. And we were not saying that only women are abused. Men are also abused, as you rightfully said. The data show that 1 in 4. But we want men to be able to report. And even as I say that, I am thinking of stories that I've heard where men have approached the police to report, and police have said to men, strong man like you allow that woman to beat you, you allowing the woman to curse you. So that is saying to us that in our police force, we need to do much more work. And I say much more work because lots of work. I know the police the police have benefited from lots of training. I recall Dr. Janice Jackson doing training on domestic violence with the police. I know that we have trained lots of social workers who are in the police force and who have been working with their counterparts on domestic violence in terms of how they report, how they respond, etc. But it goes to show that notwithstanding the training that has been ongoing, you still have those rogue elements because of their socialization. They cannot look past that to what the reality is, that men are victims of domestic violence as well, and that they should not be shamed when they report. The matter should be taken as serious as when a woman reports she's being beaten or a girl reports she's being beaten.
Here is one for you, Dr. Henry. There are laws in Guyana against domestic violence, but the studies have shown that some magistrates are insensitive to the problem of domestic violence against women. Police officers, they claim, do not understand the laws of domestic violence. And more studies have shown that some magistrates and police officers accept bribes from the richer folks in society to make the case go away, domestic violence case go away. And the government does not prosecute anyone in which alleged victims of domestic violence agree to drop the case in exchange for a monetary payment or promises that may or may not be fulfilled. What do you say about that?
The thing is, I won't be able to answer that because unless I have the data in front of me that can clearly point me to those cases. Admittedly, there will be allegations of for or against, where people will say that there is no justice on particular issues. But unless we have a hard facts, hard data, um, it would be, improper of me to to sit here tonight and to say that yes, this is so. What I would want to say, however, is to join with Dionne in saying that a lot of investments have been made in the judicial system. We have family court, we have a Juvenile Justice Act, we have very modern legislation. We have quite a lot in place to make sure that there is systems and institutional strengthening. A lot of investments have been made in police officers, but every day we see new police officers coming on board. So there has to be constant training and retraining and upskilling with the knowledge, attitudes, and skills to address the magnitude of the problem. We cannot just assume that because we train to, that people will immediately change their behaviors. We have to monitor how those trainings are utilized. We have to monitor how, whether the number of cases that are reported, the number that are successful when they are placed before the court, what the penalty looked like and why. Those are the kinds of things that will give us the evidence to justify a position. But for us to make an assumption based on allegation, right, rather than hard facts, I think it would be, not right for us to address the matter like that. What I will end by saying, though, that a lot of work needs to be done at every level of all of our institutions responsible for addressing all forms of violence.
One for you, Miss. And let me give it, because time is of the essence here. Let's talk about the children. Studies have shown that domestic violence affect children in a number of ways, including psychiatric disorders, problems at school, aggressive behaviors, and low self-esteem, among many others. What would you say to the parents of those children?
In the first place, I think our parents need to understand how their actions affect their children. That is important. They need to. Sometimes we find it difficult to say what are our challenges in terms of we don't know how to do this parenting thing right. Some persons have difficulty in saying that. And so I'm simply saying that wherever necessary, when parents need assistance, they should not be afraid to reach out to that assistance. And they may not know how their actions may affect the children, but by exposure, by being able to talk about it, would allow them to learn that and to be able to modify behavior where necessary. Now, sometimes our parents are not able to pick this up, but there is what we call the school welfare system, where sometimes the teachers pick up when children are affected in our schools, and sometimes they are referred to the school's welfare department, because sometimes what happens is that their attendance at school is affected, and so that would be a case to be reported to school welfare. Sometimes they turn up to school, but they're sleeping in school. When asked why they're sleeping in school, they did not sleep last night because mommy and daddy were fighting all night. And so that gets to the school's welfare department, which is staffed by social workers. Albeit it's just about 50 something for 1,000 and something schools in Guyana. But our there is need for parental education for our parents. They need that kind of support. Even our extended family. You know, T.S. Saimi, in his seminal work about welfare and planning in the West Indies, one of the things he spoke to is the role that the extended family played in terms of providing that support and informal fostering. I think Paulette has alluded to this, in that we have moved away from that. And I think we need to return to that, because no man is an island. A family is not an island by itself. It's not a unit by itself. It's one of many, all coming together that would make up a community. And so we all need each other. And our community our communities need to return to what they used to be. That supportive unit network where families get support either from another family, either from any community-based organization, or either from the religious organizations that are in our community. And I know some of this is happening through the Child Care and Protection Agency, where they are now doing community sessions, community groups. But the extent and the scope of that, I'm not aware of, but know that it's not in every community that is being done. And we need some more of that. And it should not only be through the Child Care and Protection Agencies. Other agencies need to come on board to work with our parents to provide that support. Gone are the days when mommies were at home all day long and able to provide that guidance and nurture. Now both parents are working. Children are returning after school to be left unattended 3-4 hours. And so all sorts of things happen within that time. The extended family need to play a role in that.
Okay. But, Dr. Henry, I have one for you, and I want the shortest possible answer. Studies have shown that domestic violence against men are resulting from a reaction of their own reaction, what they've done to their partner. Do you think it's the same for men? They're reacting to what the partner has done to them? And I want the shortest possible answer because time is running out.
I know we ran out of time.
Violence is violence, be it against men or women. And violence comes back to the whole issue and notion of power. And just like how men want to have that power, dominance, and control, there are women who also want that and who exercise that. I've had a case in the quarantine years ago when I was a probation officer, when a man came into my office, dropped his pants, and showed me how he was beaten with a belner. And that's just one case that I saw. That it was not the only one. It's dominance, it's power, it's control. Men and women deserve better. We all should live in a community free from any form of violence.
Professors, before I ask you a closing remark, I just want to do an advertisement from the Guyana Consulate of New York, part of Globespan outreach. The Consulate General of New York under Consul General Michael Broderson will have Emancipation Day celebration here in New York next Monday, August the 1st at the Medgar Evers College in Brooklyn from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Of course, there will be lots of food, black-eyed peas and rice with saltfish, fufu, fried plantain, bacon saltfish, conky and pone, of course with marbies, swank and sorrel. Now there's only limited space, so if you want to attend free of charge, please call the consulate to be there. It is a great celebration here as we celebrate Emancipation Day next Monday. Dr. Henry and Professor Frank, we are closing time. Quickly, if you don't mind, 30 seconds. Can you give us a closing statement?
All right, I'll go first. You know, violence in any form is an obstacle to development. Having said that, we need to continuously try to find solution to the problems that we are experiencing, whether at the community level, the family level, or as a nation. And I also want to take the opportunity to encourage men and women. You are affected, speak up and speak out. When you speak up and speak out, we get a better understanding of the problem and we're able to address it, whether it's at the micro level or at the macro level.
Thank you, Professor Frank. Dr. Henry, anything in closing?
Yes, I just wanted to say too that if we want to prevent violence in all of its form, we have to invest in it. It requires a social and economic investments, and it requires that holistic approach, right, for us to address it at every level. Together we can do it if we invest enough and if we care enough. It's about power, it's about control, but together we can address the issues and live in a beautiful and healthy society. I want to say thank you too for inviting us to be a part of your program.
Thank you, both professors. I know there are a lot more questions. Dr. Tara Singh sent me a question to ask, but we couldn't ask it because time was running on us. Dr. Rose, any closing statement?
Yes, and you spoke about emancipation, which is next Monday. And the Macedonia Joppa Emancipation Committee, Volunteer Committee, will have a spectacular Emancipation Day on Monday. It starts at 6:30 a.m. It's an all-day celebration with a road race with hundreds of dollars in prizes, thousands of dollars in prizes, then a road march, then competition, dressing competition, food competition, and these are all African food. You mentioned about African dishes, but you did not mention metamji. That's what
they have it in the menu.
And there'll be a competition for all of those things, and poetry, singing, and everything else, drummer and everything else. That's of the quarantine. The Macedonia Joppa district, and that's where I'm from, folks. So that will be a spectacular Emancipation Day celebrations next Monday. See and be there. Thank you.
Yes, and of course the one in Brooklyn, there'll also be drumming, African drumming and African dancing. A really great program, so please come for those of you who live in the area. Come to that program, it should be great. So again, ladies, thank you so much for being in our program. Thank you, Dr. Rose. Thank you, our audience. Thank you, Noah, and to Devin, and to everyone else. Please come back sometime in the near future because there's so many other questions that we need to ask about domestic violence. And to our men and women out there, please respect each other. Be your brother's keeper. Think of, as Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. Love your wife as yourself. Wife, love your husband as yourself. Do not throw each other down. You guys were made for each other. Let the children see how beautiful family they have. So when they grow up, they will also have their own beautiful family. God bless us all and God bless our great country.
Sister's keeper. Thank you, Dr. Henry, and thank you, Ms.
Frank.
Have a pleasant evening.
You too.